Introduction to California Indians. Themes and topics that will overlap and remain constant throughout the first quarter of the semester are the following: resources, collision of cultures, and resistance. For resources, these are things that people or a society needs to sustain themselves and prosper. For example, today we need employment, food, healthcare, gas, education, etc. A long list of things that we need to sustain ourselves and to prosper. For California Indians, this may have meant access to land, access to water, abundant game, etc. For collision of cultures, for culture, we mean a wide variety of things including language, traditions, customs, mannerisms, religion, a sense of time or how you track time, sexual orientation or sexual preference, politics, how money functions in a particular society, etc. For resistance, as we continue with our lectures focused on California Indians, we will focus on their resistance to European, Euro-American colonization of their land and culture. Keep these three themes and topics in mind as we continue with our lectures throughout the next couple of weeks. The 4 different time periods we will be addressing are the following: pre-European settlement, the Spanish era, also known as the Mission era, the Mexican era, the Gold Rush and post-Gold Rush era. The lectures will follow this time frame, but the readings, documentaries, along with the themes and topics will overlap during the next couple of weeks. Before we continue with our introduction on California Indians, we must address particular terms that have been used historically for the original peoples in the Western Hemisphere. The following are common terms used: Indian, Native American, American Indian, and Indigenous. These terms that have been coined by academics and popular media, they are all incorrect, but at the same time correct. What do we mean by this? We mean that Pomo, Chumash, Miwok, Paiute, these are just to list the California Indian peoples, are all distinct people with their own geographical territories, governments, culture, and traditions. The above terms, such as Native American or American Indian, these are umbrella terms that underline the similarities or common ground shared by American Indian peoples. It is also important to understand that historically, terms like Indian or Native have been used in a very derogatory fashion. Currently, however, these same terms have been redefined and embraced by many Indians, quote unquote, and is used as a source of positive identification and pride. While this can be quite confusing for most non-Indian people or non-American Indian people, in this class, during our discussions and writings, the politically correct terms we will be using, or the widely acceptable terms, will be American Indian if we're talking about the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, or if we want to be more precise in terms of talking about American Indian people in the territory of California, we can use the term California Indian. But we are going to be even more accurate and more precise. Most California Indian people like to be referred to their particular tribe, such as Miwok, Paiute, Chumash, Pomo, etc. Continuing with our introduction to California Indians, we must understand this idea of the West, quote unquote, and the frontier. When most hear the term the West or the Old West, they imagine the frontier. Some may think of Star Trek, the final frontier. Academics and popular media have imagined the frontier as the wild or the Wild West, open land, lawlessness, the idea of starting anew, gold, wealth, cowboys and Indians, Anglo-Americans from the East moving west, etc. Frederick Jackson Turner, a famous historian of the early 1900s, argues in his famous thesis that the West, as the final frontier of North America, is quote unquote open and quote unquote free, and is what made America what it is and what made Americans who they are. In the frontier, you learn to mate nature, cultivate land, own property, pay taxes, and become American. But we have to ask the question, this definition of the West and the frontier, who does it fit? And whose experience does this entail in the West? This thesis is wrong because it is open and free. Land was already occupied by Native Americans and Mexicans. It was only open and free because Native Americans and Mexicans were driven off. Our working definition for the frontier for this class is a zone of human interaction where ideas and culture meet peacefully through trade, but also violently through war, domination, and disease. On one hand, Native Americans and Europeans met peacefully and traded extensively with each other, both sides possessing material goods that the other desired. However, violence will overwhelmingly dominate this early history. A recurring example of this violence is referred to as the quote-unquote virgin soil epidemic. This is when a new disease is introduced to an area or community where the existing population has no immunity to it. Diseases such as gonorrhea, smallpox, diphtheria, chickenpox, etc., brought by Europeans and introduced to American Indians, had devastating effects. These diseases often wiped out total populations with Take note that the history of the Americas does not begin with European arrival. The history of the United States and California does not begin with European arrival. American Indian peoples had infinite zones of interaction, or frontiers, if you will, for centuries before Columbus. However, the together of these two very distinct peoples, California Indians and Europeans and their cultures, two different worlds to be more precise, will be unparalleled in American history. What is the origin of California Indians? To fully understand the people, we must explore their origins. There are two very distinct arguments from two very distinct schools of thought. One derives from Western culture. Take note not to mistake this with our previous conversation about the West, We are now talking about something totally separate. This is Western culture. Western culture is the various disciplines that originate from Europe, such as science, philosophy, music, literature, etc. An example might be classical music, Socrates, the scientific method. Because most of us grow up in Western institutions, the way we think, act, live out our lives is either mildly or heavily influenced by Western culture. The other is derived from indigenous thought. This is roughly explained by indigenous peoples, or in this case, American Indian peoples' intimate connection with their natural surroundings. Academics from Western universities explain the origins of American Indian peoples with the Bering Strait theory. This is the Bering land bridge formed thousands of years ago, connecting the northern tip of present-day Alaska with Siberia. This land bridge in the upper left-hand corner is referred to as Barania. Over a period of several thousand years, 3 different waves of migrants from Asia migrated to the Americas. They were small bands of hunter and gatherer societies that migrated south and southwest, settling in different areas. Hunting and gathering bands usually need 25 square miles per group member in order to have enough food to feed their entire group. Thus, migrating bands who found existing societies were forced to continue migrating southwest in search of unclaimed territories, eventually populating North, Central, and South America. By the arrival of Europeans, there were an estimated 30 million people in the Western Hemisphere, with thousands of different cultures, traditions, customs, governmental structures, and territories. Some societies will develop agriculture, which will profoundly change human life. Unlike hunter and gatherer societies, agriculture will enable people to settle in one area. The planting of food and its predictability with the seasons will increase populations. With this increase of populations, societies will be divided into various specializations, such as crafts, trade, farmers, laborers, religious orders, military, etc. This surplus of people with their specializations will create a social class, where one class provides labor, while another class does not labor, but benefits from what is produced by that labor. Indigenous thought argues a different theory. This theory is based in their creation beliefs. Most American Indians challenge the Bering Strait theory, arguing that they did not migrate from anywhere, but were created from the natural environment that their people have been living for centuries. For example, the California Maidu believed that the coyote and the robin created animals, plants, and human beings. The mountain Miwok creation story is as follows. As the earth filled with water, Coyote got together with Frog to make a place to live. Frog dug up and brought up 2 handfuls of sand, when Coyote scattered the sand all around and created land. Next he created pine nuts and acorns and all other kinds of food. When he finished, he said to Frog, "This is a good earth, and now I'll create the people to make it their home." After hearing these 2 very distinct schools of thought, one from Western culture the other from indigenous thought. You may hold one belief as true while the other as false. Despite this, what is important here is the eventual coming together of these two different peoples and their distinct cultures. As Spanish Franciscans and their accompanying soldiers begin to settle California, there will not be a mutual respect for these differences. Rather, Spaniards, especially the priests, will view California Indians and their culture as inferior, childlike, and uncivilized. And therefore, in their religious zeal, will argue an obligation to force, most often through various forms of violence, Spanish culture, and all it entails, on California Indians. This is at the heart of the collision of cultures that play out time and time again throughout California history. Population and diversity. Western academics believe California Indians have been in the area for some 12,000 to 15,000 years. California Indians lived in each of California's diverse regions: the Sierras, the Central Valley, the Mojave Desert, and the coastal regions. It was not a wilderness, but a homeland, a land abounding with sacred sites, work areas, trails, villages, favorite gathering, and hunting grounds. When Europeans arrived, it was the most densely populated area in North America and the most culturally diverse. There were roughly 300 to 340,000 California Indians, speaking over 100 different languages. Why so many? As with most contemporary migrants coming to California, it was and continues to be the conducive climate and abundance of resources. Unlike other parts of North America, California does not have extreme weather conditions. In terms of resources for California Indians, they possess territories with an abundance of wild game and edible foodstuffs. General characteristics. Like most American Indians of the Americas, California Indians had an indigenous worldview. At the core of their identity and livelihood, they lived their life accordingly. They sought balance between the physical and spiritual well-being of their people and the surrounding natural environment. This balance was understood through reciprocity, where individuals and villages made offerings to the Creator and earth spirits, and in turn expected a favorable relationship between themselves and the natural elements, such as access to game or animals, wild foodstuffs, sufficient rain, fertility, etc. They never overhunted or overfished in order to maintain natural cycles and balance. They believed in the unity between man and nature, including animals. They saw themselves as the caretakers of land. Everything was tied to the Creator, so everything, including man and nature, was sacred. Nothing was simply an object. In the killing of an animal, drinking of water, or entering the cave had to be accompanied by a ritual, however simple, a sign of respect and acknowledgement. Nothing went to waste. California Indian societies were divided into tribes, triblets, and villages. Tribes shared a common name, culture, possessing a well-defined territory. Some of the largest were the Yokuts, which were 25,000 around the San Joaquin Valley, and the Yomon along the Colorado River. Triblets consist of one central village with 4 or more smaller villages that surrounded it. Villages consisted of 100 to 500 persons. These triblets too had a well-defined and defended territory. Political unity and allegiance was to the central village where the headman or chief resided. The village and family consisted of family unit. This is where society mandated control in discipline and discipline. This was within the family. There were no police or court systems. Shunning was the ultimate control or ultimate form of control, because no one could survive alone. Thus, there was no corporal punishment. There was no locking up of people or capital punishment. Gender roles and division of labor. For the men, they were responsible for hunting, fishing. They were also the religious figures, the warriors. If, for example, in the southeastern region of California, if they were a warrior society. They were carvers, carving both wood, bone, and stone. They were musicians and oral traditionalists. The women were responsible for the gathering of foodstuff. They were responsible for cooking, taking care of the household. They were midwives and child raisers. Along with their artistry, they will be world renowned for their basket making. This was their highest form of art. If there was agriculture, such as in the eastern region of California, agriculture was not done by men, but it was done by women. Important figures in leadership. California Indians had a chief or a head person. This person was wise and influential and could galvanize community action. He also had the power to administer economic efforts such as the making of goods or the access to hunting grounds. He also had ceremonial authority. But he was powerless without the support of a council of elders. Thus, there were checks and balances within the leadership and decision-making process of California Indian tribes. Many women were also chief, such as female chiefs in the Chumash and Pomocans. The shaman was also a very important figure. He was a combination of a physician, psychologist, herbalist, and spiritual leader. Another important figure to point out was the Two-Spirit. The Two-Spirit was someone that California Indians believed had the spirit of a male and a female. In today's terms, we may use the term transgender for a person like this, a male in a female's body or a female in a male's body. This is also accompanied, but not always, with homosexuality. Unlike our society, for California Indians and for most American Indian nations, the Two-Spirit was widely accepted in society. They were or could hold important social positions. Men could publicly marry men, women could publicly marry women. California Indian dwellings. California Indian dwellings were mainly dome-shaped or rectangular, and they utilized the available wood and brush in the area. California Indian food. Some California Indians in the southeastern section of California practice small-scale agriculture, such as the Mojave, Yuma, Coahuila, along the Colorado River. They planted squash, corn, and beans, along with other agricultural products. However, the majority of California Indians were based on hunting and gathering. Tribes along the coast fished, collected seashells, hunted sea mammals, the animals found on the shore and in the ocean tides. Riverine and lakeshore tribes hunted and trapped small game and fished. Central Valley, plains, and foothill tribes hunted and gathered wild foodstuffs. Acorn was the staple. They made porridge, bread, and flour out of acorn. Porridge was usually seasoned with fruits, weeds, and bits of meat, and their diet was balanced and nutritious. Unlike early European testimonies that painted a picture of primitive savages simply living off of what was available to them, California Indians, like all American Indians of the continent, had a vast knowledge and understanding of natural resources. They manipulated their environment to suit their needs. They utilized and burn techniques that were common practice to replenish soil and attract game. They pruned plants and trees. They developed hand weeding and culled insects and animals. They transplanted preferred plants for consumption and for ceremonial use, such as jimson weed, elderberry shrubs, and walnut trees. In areas where water sources were scarce, California Indians developed advanced irrigation systems for planting crops, drinking, and bathing. And they did all of this, of course, keeping the natural cycles and ecological balance in their natural environment. The economy and trade. The California Indian economy was based in trade. Materials that were traded included black obsidian that were used for spears, knives, and other tools, granite used for grinding stones, salt, tar, seashells. Seashells were used as a currency and for decorations. Cinnabar mines. Because of the abundance of resources, trade was fair, and because trade was fair, most California Indian tribes experienced long periods of peace. Each tribe specialized in one or more trades depending on where they lived and the natural environment. Trade increased interconnectedness between tribes and reduced conflict. Thus, California Indians prided themselves in being neighborly and peaceful. This doesn't mean there was not occasional conflicts. Trespassing, the abduction of a woman, poaching, or in the southeast, in the more arid desert regions, competition of scarce resources would cause conflict and war. But in general, California Indians were relatively peaceful. Other general characteristics. California Indians did not develop a writing system, so their history, invaluable knowledge, and skills were recorded orally, meaning that it was passed down from one generation to the next orally and through memory. Most tribes, except the southwestern tribes that used pottery, engaged in basket weaving. California Indian baskets are unmatched in the utility of them and their beauty of design. Baskets were used in all aspects of life. They could hold boiling water without caulking. And today, they go on the world market for several $1,000s. Sweat lodges, or temescal, was a common ritual and pastime. These were purification lodges used for rituals and prayer, cleansing, and general socializing.